seated. Oh, y'all are all sitting down. That's really awkward. So, good morning. Welcome to Ruth. Oh, that's the book we are going to be in. If you haven't turned there, I have like 15 minutes to go over the entire book. So, 4 chapters in 15 minutes. Who thinks I can do it? Y'all are like, please be done in 15 minutes. Like, that's barely my mind span is only 8 minutes. So, anyway. Leading up to Ruth, for those of you who haven't been following us through this journey, we are on the Gospel Project, which basically takes us from beginning of the Bible to the end of the Bible in 3 years. We started this in August, and so we have gone from creation to Noah and the flood. We've gone to Abraham and how God made a covenant with him. Then we went to the Israelites becoming enslaved by the Egyptians. And from the Egyptian captivity, they were released from by the 10 plagues, and then they went to the wilderness for 40 years to wander. And now we finally finished the 40 years of wandering. They have come to the promised land. They broke up the land for each of the 12 tribes. Each tribe got a portion of the land. And we find ourselves in the time of the judges. TJ last week covered Samson and Gideon, who personally, they're my 2 favorite judges. My favorite 2 stories of the entire Bible are Samson and Gideon, so I hope he did well. Unfortunately, I was not here. But today we finish Judges, not with a judge, but with a woman and the story of a woman who takes place during the judges' time. So we're going to start in chapter 1, verse 1. So in the days when the judges ruled, there was a famine in the land. So a man from Bethlehem in Judah, together with his wife and his 2 sons, went to live in the country of Moab. The man's name was Elimelech. Yeah, I pronounced that correctly. His wife was named Naomi, and the names of his 2 sons were Mahlon and Chilion. They were Ephrathites, yeah, because that's a big word, and from Bethlehem, which is in Judah. And they went to Moab, and they lived there. Now Elimelech, Naomi's husband, died, and she was left with her 2 sons. And they married Moabite women. One was named Orpah, and the other was named Ruth. So after they lived there about 10 years, both Mahlon and Chilion also died, and Naomi was left without her 2 sons and her husband. So there's Naomi. The men in her life have passed on in the land of Moab. And so we see Naomi has nothing left. Because back in that time, whenever your husband died as a woman, your sons would take care of you. But even Naomi's sons have died. And so she has literally no one to take care of them. And so she decides that it's best for her to go home. See, and it's also kind of ironic because Elimelech took his family to dodge a drought and to dodge starvation. And then they ended up perishing in Moab. Now, it doesn't tell us why they died, but Naomi tells us that she feels the hand of God is against her. And so she decides that she's going to go back home, and maybe she can find someone from her family who would be able to take care of her, right? Naturally, that would be the way to go. And so she tells the 2 daughters-in-law, Orpah and Ruth, that, hey, I'm going back. Y'all should stay here because y'all will actually have somewhat of a life here. And so they cry. And so this is where we pick up. We're now in verse 12. There it is. Oh. So, Naomi's speaking to her daughters, and she says, "Return home. I am too old to have another husband. Even if there was still hope for me, even if I had a husband tonight and then gave birth to sons, would you wait until they grew up? Would you remain unmarried for them? No, my daughters, it is more bitter for me than for you, because the Lord's hand has turned against me." At this, they wept again, and Orpah kissed her mother-in-law goodbye, and Ruth clung to her. "Look," Naomi said to Ruth, she said, "your sister-in-law is going back to her people, her gods. Go back with her." But Ruth said, "Don't urge me to leave you or to run back from you, or turn back from you. Where you go, I will go. Where you stay, I will stay. Your people will be my people, and your God, my God. When you die, or where you die, and there I will be buried. May the Lord deal with me, be it ever so severely, if even death separates you and I. Do y'all feel the love Ruth has for Naomi? She has probably heard stories about this God of Israel who has had the 10 plagues on Egypt, who parted the Red Sea, who has allowed Israel to conquer this land, the promised land. And we see Ruth has faith in God through Naomi and through probably her late husband, although I don't know which one she was married to. So Ruth has faith, y'all. And so we get to see a glimpse of that in this. And so they return to Bethlehem. And they don't really have anything. They go back, they find a house, they live in it, and there's not really anything there. And so Naomi tells Ruth, listen, go to a field and get grain for us so we can eat. Grain would end up turning into bread. And so that's what she tells her to do. And so Ruth says, okay, yeah, that sounds like a good idea. So she goes and she just starts taking grain from the field, right? You know, if it'd be similar to if you didn't have any food and you saw at Walmart they set aside like this little pallet and it had some bread on it, and you just went and grabbed it off the pallet, you know, and like, okay, I got food now. Like, what would that be okay now? No, that'd be stealing, right? See, it's different though for Israelites. See, for the law, they had actually God had told the people, listen, leave a portion of the land, allow the foreigners and those without to come and take from that portion so that they don't die of starvation. So it's a way of God providing for them. Now, it's not just like, hey, go take this amount and just give it to someone and give it to them so that way they can just have something. No, they actually have to go and that's set aside for them. But if you don't have, you have to actually go and get it. And so I think that's one thing that is very unique to the Israelites. It's not thievery. It's actually law that they can go. So we see Ruth, she goes. And she starts picking up grain from a field. She's just, going, grabbing grain just like that in the cartoon. And then we get introduced to this interesting person. His name is Boaz. That's a strong name. Who wants to be named Boaz? I got one. Me too, dude. Boaz is a pretty sweet name. So, Boaz. I don't know. I feel like that's the way you need to say it. Anyway, so we introduced to Boaz. And he is this awesome man of God, it seems like. The first thing we see him doing is his servants are coming up. And he says, the Lord be with you. And they say, also with you. And so what he's saying there is God is first. So whenever he sees even his people, he's reminding them, hey, I hope the Lord is with you. I hope that you are doing well. Like we'd be like, hey, how you doing? That's the same thing, except pointing to God, like, hey, how's the Lord doing in your life? So we see Boaz, and that's where we pick up in verse 8. Oh, wait, I lied. We're not there yet. So Boaz is there, and he actually sees Ruth in his field, right? And so we see, okay, he greeted his servants, and then he sees this woman, and for some reason, he goes to his overseer. Overseer is like a boss, and so he's like, hey, who's this woman? And so the Bible doesn't say this, but why would a dude ask about a female? I mean, come on, y'all. Like, he's probably like, hey, this chick's kind of pretty. Who is this girl? And so he goes up to the overseer, and the overseer's like, yeah, her name is Ruth. She came back with Naomi. She's a Moabite. She's a foreigner. And she's actually been working from morning, so the sun rises about 6:30, so think about morning till now. And it's almost lunchtime, it seems. So about 5 hours. And she's only taken one short break. And Boaz is like, wait, what? This chick has been working for 5 hours with one break? Oh. And so, I mean, the Bible doesn't say that. This is just me inferring from the Bible. So Boaz is like, man, this chick's got it together. So he goes to Ruth. And he says, my daughter, this is in chapter 2, verse 8. So he says, my daughter, listen to me. Do not go and glean from another field. I hope that I've used glean multiple times. If you don't know what glean means already, you haven't been listening. So don't go and glean from another field. Stay here. And with the woman that worked for me, watch the field where the men are harvesting and follow along after the woman. I have told the men not to lay a hand on you. And whenever you are thirsty, go and get a drink from the water jars the men have filled. And so we see Boaz interacting with Ruth. And he does a couple of things here that I think that we need to pay attention to. He offers protection for Ruth. That he's telling her, hey, if you went to another field, someone may take advantage of you. Someone may take you and harm you in certain ways. And so he's saying, no, look, stay in this field, and I'll protect you. But then he also provides for her. He says, don't just glean from the section that is set aside for foreigners. He says, go to the entire field also. Take from what I have in its entirety, not just the edge. And so we see him not only protecting her, but he also provides for her. And we see Ruth, if you were to read on from that section, she bows before him. She falls on her face because she knows she doesn't deserve this. This is Ruth showing humility to Boaz. She's saying, Lord, why are you doing this? Like, why are you being so kind to me? And he says, because I've seen your faithfulness. I've seen your devotion to to Naomi, and to God. And he says, because of that, you have found favor in my eyes. And so he's proud of her, she's working hard for this woman that she really has no reason to work hard for. And so Boaz tells him, and so they go and they eat lunch, right? And Boaz invites her, hey, come eat with us. And he provides for her again, and he gives her enough lunch that she has so much that she has leftovers. You go to a restaurant, I don't know many dudes that may do this, but you get the little doggy bag, and I don't know, do you call it a doggy bag still? No, I don't even know what you call it. Used to, you'd call it a doggy bag because you would take the leftovers, you'd give them to your dog, but I don't think that happens anymore. Anyway, segue, I probably shouldn't have said that, but you would take it and you have leftovers, right? And you put it in a little styrofoam thing that you're not allowed to, you can ask questions in your group. We're going to break up into groups later. You get the styrofoam box that you can't actually microwave, but I do it all the time. I'm probably going to die of cancer or something because of that. But you put it in and you eat it, right? So Naomi basically Ruth gets a doggy bag for Naomi because Boaz has provided so much lunch for her. Like, that's crazy. There's so much that he gives her that she has leftovers. So she ate her fill. She goes back to work. So this is after lunch. After she leaves, Boaz goes and he tells his men, hey, whenever y'all see Ruth gleaning from the rest of the field, don't get mad at her. Like, I've told her that's okay. And also, she's going to follow behind y'all. And when she does, take some of your bushels and lay them out for her so she doesn't have to work so hard to get good grain. Because biology tells us men are stronger than women. And so they're able to cut and glean faster and better. I don't know what you call a wheat stalk. Better. And so if they were to leave that, all of a sudden Ruth doesn't have to work so hard to get this great wheat. And so, or it's barley, really. It's pretty much the same thing. But then she gets to glean so much, right? So she goes home at the end of the day. And we see Boaz. I'm sorry, I keep skipping ahead. Man, I'm bad at this today. So we get to see Boaz's character in his provision for Ruth, right? So, gentlemen, I want you guys to look at this. Like, really think about Boaz right here. He doesn't go after Ruth just because she's pretty. The Bible doesn't actually say he found her attractive. I'm just assuming that he found her attractive. And so, but he also asks, like, hey, who is this chick? And the overseer, remember, he tells Boaz, she's been working really hard. And so, one thing I want y'all to see, don't date just for looks. Like, just because a girl is pretty is not allow you to say, I'm going to date her. Like, girls' beauty is great and everything, but I think that we have idolized beauty in women too much. And gentlemen, I think that you guys are going to suffer from this. So that's one thing I really want you guys to see in this. And not only that, but you should have good character yourselves, gentlemen. A real man has good character, and as the story goes on, we get to see Boaz's character go even further. And that means providing for your future wife, and it also means protecting your future wife. We see both of these characteristics in Boaz. So as he's going out there, he doesn't just go up and he doesn't have some pickup line. He's not like, hey, girl, how you doing? You know, like he goes up and he says, hey, I'm going to provide for you. I'm going to protect you, right? He doesn't have no pickup line like no Christian. Like, I mean, how many, y'all probably going to go up to a girl and have this straight pickup line like, hey, if I walk around you 7 times, would you fall for me? Like, I mean, that's not what Boaz does. He doesn't use these cheesy pickup lines to show that he's going to protect her. He actually provides and protects Ruth. He doesn't just go and use words. He uses actions, okay? And I think that's extremely important, and I want y'all to really think about that because I know, I mean, hopefully you're not dating yet because dating in middle school is really dumb. But in the future, whenever you do begin dating, think about these things, okay? So 3 hours later. Not really. Well, really, she worked for 3 hours, and then she went home, and Naomi's like, what is all this food? You got all this food from one day of work? And Ruth's like, yeah. She's like, who gave you all this food? Like, you don't have the ability to get all this food by yourself. And she's like, well, this dude Boaz was, like, helping me out, and, like, I got all this food. And Naomi's like, you need to stay in his field, and you need to, like, help anything he's giving you. Like, this is amazing. Because, y'all, Boaz gave her a lot of stuff. Like, this isn't normal. To receive as much grain as Ruth had isn't normal. So then we get to fast forward a couple of days, not just 3 hours. So it's been a couple of days. And we are now we're in chapter 3, so we're halfway there. Sorry, I'm taking more than my 15 minutes. Hope y'all are okay with that. And so we see Ruth and Naomi. And Naomi tells Ruth, hey, Boaz is a redeemer for our family. And so you need to go seek Boaz. And what that means is you need to approach him and say, hey, my family needs a redeemer. And we think that could be you. You've already provided, you've shown some initiative for us. Will you be our redeemer? And so that's what Ruth does. She seeks him and she talks to him. But not only that, she actually goes, she takes a bath, which for that time and day, like they didn't, or that time in days, age, they didn't take baths every day, right? So bathing was a pretty big deal. And then she also puts on perfume and nicer clothes. So another thing that I want y'all to realize, like, Boaz has provided so much for them that she has the ability to even purchase perfume. So what turned into, okay, go glean from the edges of the fields so that way we don't starve, they now have abundance of things. So Ruth goes to Boaz. She asks him, will you be our redeemer? Which basically is like, hey, can you marry me so that way the line of Elimelech can be continued and that we have a family again? And Boaz says, I will, but there's someone who has rights before me. And so Boaz has to go and he has to talk to this other person first, right? It's so he's basically an older dude than he is, and he has first rights. So what would happen is if you married Ruth, then they would get all of the land and everything as well, and all the inheritance that came with Elimelech. And so Boaz is like, I gotta go talk to this guy first. So the next day, Boaz goes and he goes in front of the elders, and he asks the Redeemer, will you take Ruth, and will you be the Redeemer? And he's like, well, I guess I could. And he's like, well, that means that you have to take the inheritance too. And he's like, oh, well, I already have an inheritance, so I don't really need that inheritance, so I'm good. And so Boaz is like, all right, well, I'm next in line because this guy didn't want to do it. And so, oh, okay. So we see Boaz goes and he redeems Ruth. And so in that, they get married and they have children. So one last thing. I've already talked to the dudes a little bit about dating. So ladies, it's your turn. We got a young guy up here telling us how to date. No, it's not. It's okay. It's pretty chill. It's like simple things that I just want y'all to be in y'all's mind. The first thing, if he's not ultimately seeking marriage, he's not worth your time. I'm not saying that you're gonna get married like when you're in middle school. Like, that's not what I'm saying. But in my eyes, if you're dating, the ultimate goal is marriage. Is that y'all see the connection there? You date to get to know the person and see whether or not you want to marry them. If you ever ask a guy, hey, where do you see our relationship going? He's like, I don't know. I just like to date. Real? No. That, gentlemen, if you ever say that, you shouldn't be dating. Okay? So, ultimately you date for marriage. If you're not willing to date for marriage, don't date. Be friends. You know, you can have group dates to ice cream parlors. Go over to Freezing Point. I'm sure Caleb would love to see all of your smiling faces and ransacking his freezing point. I think that'd be great as a group. Get to know people, okay? And the other thing is find a man who will protect and care for you, okay? Those are major things. If he's not willing to protect and care for you, then he's not worth your time. If you're not looking at those two things, I mean, there's other things like he needs to be a Christian. Dude, she has to be a Christian. Things like that you'll learn further on. But these are two things that if this isn't happening, y'all, don't even worry about it. And I'm hoping that this something sticks in your brain for the future, and not necessarily for the immediate, because again, dating in middle school is stupid. Okay, so back to redeeming. So we see Boaz redeems Ruth and her family, and they get married, and they have kids, and they continue the line of Elimelech. And so one thing I didn't mention was whenever Naomi got back to Bethlehem, everyone was like, oh, hey, Naomi, how's it been? Where's your husband? Where's your boys? Who's this chick? She's like, don't call me Naomi. Call me Sadness. Yeah, so up until this point, everyone's calling her Sadness because that's how she feels. She's like, I'm sad all the time. The Lord is against me. But now she's been redeemed. Her family has been redeemed. And so she goes back to being called Naomi. And so this is where we pick it up in verse 17 of chapter 4. So the women living there said, Naomi has a son. And so they're excited. That's why the exclamation point's there, grammar. And they named him Obed, which is a cool name, Obed. Boaz, the son of Obed. Wait, Obed, the son of Boaz. That's awkward. And he was the father of Jesse. And Jesse was the father of David. And so, see, y'all, this story seems really pointless. Like, okay, that's great. We see Boaz and Ruth, and that's how they dated and became married, and that's great. Redeemer. But this relationship, the reason this story is in the Bible is it shows God's hand in Ruth, who was a Moabite, a foreigner who never would have known Boaz without Naomi. And that's how the line of David intercedes. And so I really want you to think about why is there a foreigner in the line of David, one of the greatest, or the greatest king of Israel? And so we also see that Boaz, because he redeems Ruth, he brings a new life to Ruth and Naomi. They now have someone who's going to provide for them, right? But also we see something else. Jesus redeems us in the same way that Boaz has redeemed Ruth and her family and ultimately brings about the birth of David. And from the line of David, who comes? Jesus. Yeah, that's the one time I'm going to allow you to say Jesus and it'd be the right answer. So Jesus ultimately comes from this line of people. They have a bunch of like baby and the baby and the baby and the baby and the baby. Like great granddad of Jesus was Boaz. Did y'all know that? Yeah, that's pretty cool. So, same way Boaz redeems Ruth, y'all. Jesus redeems us. And if you haven't understood or you don't understand how Jesus redeems us and how he gives us life when we had death, I encourage you to talk to your leader about this. Because this is important stuff. This is eternity when it comes down to it, okay? So the last thing I want to say is that the Old Testament stories, ultimately, they point to Jesus. And so if you never saw that before, I hope that so far you've started to glimpse what the Gospel Project is doing and how every story we point back to Jesus. Because the entire point of the Old Testament, why we read it, is because it's a story pointing to Jesus. Let me pray. Father God, thank you for this day. Thank you for the story of Ruth and just the understanding that your hand is in our lives, God, that you provide for us. And even provided for Ruth with Boaz and his graciousness to her. I ask that you remind us to ask questions and to seek you in all that we do, God. I ask to be with all these students as they